Hello, everybody. We're live. Welcome back to the Newt Tube, the Red Newt YouTube streaming channel, and we're here tasting some wine today. We've got a special guest, Bill Jensen from Tail Up Goat in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and of course we have our regulars, Megs Goodwin, assistant winemaker, and Kelby Russell, our winemaker, Heather O'Grady Evans, our social media guru, and myself, Dave Whiting, founding winemaker and co-owner here. So great. So we've had a kind of an eclectic mix of wines over the past few weeks, Riesling, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and today we have something very special and something maybe a little bit out of the ordinary for what we do. It's kind of a tangential to our normal sort of lineup, but a wine beloved by us and many, and it is what we lovingly call Blue Newt White. All right. So today we want to know the story of Blue Newt White. So I think I'll start because I was there in the beginning, and I'll pass off to others who have fond memories of Blue as it progressed throughout the years. As I was just a minute ago, I was pondering to myself, and I believe around 2004 was our first vintage of Blue Newt White. Now, it doesn't have a vintage date, but it runs on a vintage cycle. We make it every year. And that's like 15 years ago. We've been making Blue for 15 years. Can you believe that? So I started the winery about 20 years ago, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. I had no intentions of making Blue Newt White. I had no intentions of making Niagara wine. This is made from the Niagara grape. I'd made plenty of Niagara wine in my previous 10 years of winemaking in other places, and it can be a very delicious, grapey, unctuous, luscious kind of wine. But it wasn't part of the lineup. I was focusing on Riesling, Cabernet Franc, and in the early days, a couple of other hybrid wines, French-American hybrids, including Cayuga and Vidal. Mainly because at that time in the when was that? The late 90s, I guess. There wasn't as much Riesling planted as there is today. Hello, Rebecca. Rebecca's joining us here. And so, yeah, I was just starting the story of Blue Newt White. So back then, anyway, so we're going along, we're making Riesling, we're making this delicious wine, which many people miss, but we stopped making it, called Red Newt White, which was a blend of Riesling and some Riesling and mostly Cayuga. And we also had another Newt wine, which was called, what was it, Salamander White, which is a blend of mostly in the beginning Chardonnay. And that's a whole nother story, which dates back to the era in the Finger Lakes when you could practically not give Chardonnay away if you were a grower, because nobody was drinking it. And nobody. So anyway, that's changed, but that's why that started. But back to the Blue, we had a couple of really bad winters in the early 2000s, and so it was such a sort of a difficult time here in the Finger Lakes that we had a vintage when we had hardly any grapes. We've had almost no Riesling. We had almost no Cayuga. I mean, the supply was very, very short. And in New York State in the late 70s, the state legislature passed a set of regulations for the farm called the Farm Winery Act, which enabled folks like me and others in the Finger Lakes to start a small winery. And part of the conditions of this sort of streamlined small scale license was that you had to use grapes from New York State, a pretty high percentage, maybe, I don't remember, maybe 90% or something. So in any case, that year, they actually made an exemption from that regulation, so you could buy grapes from out of state and make wine out of it and sell it with your farm winery license. And the reason was the grape supply was in such short supply that a lot of people just couldn't get enough grapes to put wine in the bottle. And we are in business, and we have to sell wine to stay in business. So we had the opportunity to source Riesling from Washington, and bring in bulk wine or grapes and make it here and put it in our bottle and sell it. And some people did that, because it was a necessity. We were in a position at Red Newt where we had kind of built this whole vision around local. We had a locavore restaurant, which was working directly with farmers. We had this whole idea of the local expression of the Finger Lakes and through our wines. And I scratched my head and I said, it just doesn't, for me, it just doesn't make sense to get Riesling from somewhere else. I got to figure something out. And it so happened that one of the varieties, which actually performed pretty well through those harsh winters, was Niagara. So I said to myself, I know I can make, because I've made it before, a really yummy wine. Niagara wine will be nice and sweet. People will love it. I'll put it in one of those spanky blue bottles and we're going to be in business and we're going to sell lots of it. We'll make it for a couple of years. We'll get over this hump and we'll sail on the path that we started on. Well, most of that worked. I made a really delicious Niagara. I put it in a spanky blue bottle. We sold lots of it and it became like the most popular wine and people love it to this day. So we haven't had the heart to not make it. So we continue to. So one of the things that sets this wine apart, and I'm not going to talk too much more, but one of the things I wanted to accomplish right in the beginning was not to make this wine as an afterthought. And because it's pretty easy to make a sweet grapey wine as an afterthought, and a lot of people will still love it and drink it. That wasn't the point. The point was to make something that with the same kind of thought process and philosophy that we have with every other wine, and that is to make something that's balanced, expressive, and really try to get inside every little head of those grapes, because each cluster has hundreds of heads, if you will. I mean, if we assume that each grape is its own being, and express what it wants to express. So that was my goal. So in any case, we should have a taste of Niagara before we go any further, because I need a taste now. Okay, so cheers. Here's to Blue Newt White.
Cheers, Phil.
Cheers, guys. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. From what I can gather, this remains your top selling wine?
Well, actually now it's been eclipsed by Riesling, but but it's still very popular and we make quite a bit of it.
Probably our second most popular SKU. A very localized sales region.
Yeah, most of this does not make it outside the sort of the central New York and Pennsylvania region where it's most popular in Ohio. Yeah.
It's a regional specialty.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a beloved wine, though. I can tell you from looking at the sales data over the last few months, since Pennsylvania closed their state stores, the Blue Newt sales along the Pennsylvania-New York border are just through the roof. Everyone's clearly driving from Pennsylvania into New York, filling up their car and then going home.
Safely, I hope.
Safely.
Yes, with social distancing.
Mhm.
Of course. Well, it's, Blue Newt White is a wine that for a lot of people, when they're coming into the tasting room and they're talking to us, it's a memory. My mother's favorite memories of avoiding all of her big sisters as a child. We're going into my grandfather's grape vineyards. He didn't have a lot. He had Niagara, and just sitting in the vineyards and popping grapes in her mouth, and that kind of made her happy. And that's exactly what Blue Newt White gives to a lot of our clientele is fond memories in a bottle. You can make it 8,000 different ways, or you can just drink it straight up. It's up to you. And traditionally, these wines in this region would have been served with smoked trout from the lake and aged farmstead cheeses from any of the dairies. Those were the most common ways to have it.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah, no, you can't. Pretty simple.
Well, it's pretty rare in the new world that you get any kind of sense of if it grows together, it goes together, and it's really cool that developed to some extent in Western New York. And the wine itself is also a bit of a time capsule. I think people sleep on the extent to which even pre-Prohibition, there was a huge grape growing and winemaking industry in places like Ohio and Western New York. And well into the 60s and 70s, this would have been the wine that most people associated with the domestic market.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can't tell you how often I'm out in the market showing this wine, or this wine comes up and someone says, oh, this smells exactly like my grandfather's basement. And there's depending where you are in the Finger Lakes, there are very distinct Italian American populations that were that are still present here. And part of the Italian tradition is making wine, and you make wine with whatever you have at hand. So there's this was just people would make wine with the native grapes, and I think we think of Italian cuisine or Italian American cuisine with like the straw bottle of Chianti, and that's kind of like emblazoned in our head. But it's always catches me off guard how often something like this gets mentioned. Is that, oh yeah, this is what was on the we had Concord or Catawba for our red, and we had this for the white, and that was part of the family dining experience.
And the alcohol content varied depending on who was making wine.
Yeah.
Sometimes it could be pushing like 18% if you were my uncle.
What is the alcohol on the Blue Newt White?
It's 11%. Yeah. I like too, it's a wine that kind of erodes pretension. It's just kind of a take it or leave it, have fun with it. It's kind of like adult Sprite, it's a great,
I love that.
That's a great way to put it.
it's a great wine cooler wine, it's just kind of, it's fun. It's supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
We lovingly call it grape juice for adults.
Yeah. I mean, it's gonna be grapey. I mean, Niagara is the Welch's white grape juice grape. There's no, it's gonna be, what it is. But I think the thing I like about this one is the balance of acid and sugar is really on point. I think it's a wine that wants to be a little sweet. I don't think it, succeeds as well when it's fully dry. And the weight of it, the remaining sweetness gives it a playfulness that's really fun.
Yeah, I think you can definitely that it comes from a Riesling making winery where that balance point lands. And to Dave's point, I mean, we take this wine incredibly seriously in the cellar. Part of that is there's a little bit of realpolitik to it, right? This comes in so much ahead of anything else that it really doesn't interfere with any, if this was coming in the same time as all the Riesling, then we'd have a different conversation. But it comes in first. It comes in at a time when we can really give it all the attention it deserves. I often call it the wine making decathlon because really all you can do with Niagara is make it taste less like Niagara. If you don't do everything exactly correctly, and to get the fundamentals precise is really tough. Like how do you, pressing it correctly, processing it correctly, getting the ferment the right way. These things are not simple and they shouldn't be taken for granted. It's a great way to train interns. And if you aren't rock solid on those fundamentals, then, it doesn't do you any good to just experiment with winemaking at random. Like you need to know from the basis from which you're experimenting from. So it's always good relearning or re-education from Eggs and I. It's always a great way for the interns to see, when we say we want something done X way, this is what we mean. And they get a good chance to practice with it. And then the end result is a wine that really beautifully captures Niagara. And, sometimes almost embarrassingly in store tastings, I'll have a lineup of all of our best Rieslings and I'll have a bottle of blue at the end, and someone will walk by and just erupt and be like, that's the best wine I've ever had. And like drag their friends over to try.
I imagine you at Wegmans in like the cheese section. Just not to put the cart before the horse for the folks, tuning in, who've heard us talk about Niagara as a bit of an alien. It is a different species entirely than the fine wine grape. So Vitis vinifera is the grape that goes into the vast majority of fine wines, and it originated in the Old World. The scientific name vinifera itself means, the wine producing grape. Niagara actually has some vinifera DNA in it through its parent Concord, but is mostly Vitis lambrusca, which is a grape that originated in America. So that makes it a lot easier for us to work with here, because the kinds of wine blights, downy mildew, phylloxera, all these maladies that make the noble wine grape vinifera difficult to grow here, that make Riesling, Cab Franc, Merlot, all those things really challenging to grow, especially in a cooler climate like the Finger Lakes. They tend not to affect Niagara the same way, because it evolved with a lot of those diseases as over thousands and thousands of years on this side of the ocean.
The great thing about, when it comes to Niagara is it's what you smell. My family has always referred to Niagara and Concord as literally harvest in a glass, because after a full day of sunshine in September, you step outside about 5 o'clock and you take a big whiff, and you will get knocked over by the sheer sweet smell of grapes. And it's the Concords and the Niagaras really coming to fruition. They're very prolific. You only need about 1 or 2 vines, and you've got yourself enough for damn deli and wine, and probably a good couple of gallons of juice as well. I mean, it's amazing how much they can produce compared to what we're accustomed to seeing in terms of our vineyard yields for Rieslings and Cab Francs and Merlots. I think one of the funnest things that I really enjoy about talking to people about Blue Newt White, because everybody has their opinion about Blue Newt White, there is just no doubt, but to see the different ways they like to make it. There's a couple that involve gin or vodka. There are some that involve getting the right amount of muddled of the right kind of mint and using these specific kinds of fruits. Around Hector, it's real simple. If you mix it with your favorite juice, and mine is actually a currant elderberry juice that's made by one of our local producers, it's basically a poor man's mimosa. You got your sweet, you got your tart, sans bubbles. It's great for, heading out into the garden and working on in the afternoon. At Christmas time, I float frozen cranberry juice balls in the top of it so they look like little ornaments. And I add little blueberries for my mom because she doesn't like bubbles in her juice. So she gets her special little Niagara, cocktail for breakfast at Christmas time. I'm sure that everybody else has a different way they enjoy Blue Newt White. In our house, it usually involves something really fun and different that we can do while we're sitting around a table having food.
Yeah, we were talking about breakfast wines a few episodes back, but in terms of breakfast wine, where is
This
it?
is it.
Right there. That's
Legitimately.
breakfast wine.
That's right. I think that was me. I was worried that I worried you when I talked about breakfast wine.
That's common around here.
Yeah.
But this is a great one.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you were talking about the smell. It made me think, Riesling, grapes, if you walk through the vineyard at harvest, yeah, you can smell the grapes. But if you walk through a Niagara vineyard at harvest when it's getting ripe, I mean, you can smell the Niagara from 50 yards away, let alone walk through the rows. It's really quite spectacular. Yeah. And putting that in the glass, that's the challenge. And actually, it's not as easy as you might think. Kelby alluded to this ideas of, about all you can do is start losing the Niagara in the cellar. I mean, it's not building in more Niagara flavor. It's kind of retaining that essence of Niagara, and, making the right decisions about harvest, making the right decisions about handling. All those things that we are so important with every other wine are important here too. Yeah.
It's definitely the best of its class, wouldn't you say?
I always say it's the best damn Niagara in the world. And you know what?
Yeah, it really is.
If anybody wants to challenge me on that, go right ahead.
I think Mex has a really, really good repertoire, because the last time we went wine tasting together, she made it a mission to taste every single Niagara for every single winery we went to. And kudos to her, because some of them were a little on the sketchy side.
To this day, what is the mix like in terms of the amount of fruit coming out of the Finger Lakes that is from grapes like Niagara that are hybrids versus pure vinifera?
Good question.
Good question. I don't know really at this point, but I can say that there's what, close to 100 wineries in the Finger Lakes now.
Over. Yep.
There's a few handfuls of winery who are really widely distributed, outside of the region. There's not a huge number of them, and I think most of the wineries that make out of the region tend to be more vinifera, Riesling, Cabernet Franc. But in terms of wines that are sold within the region, particularly sort of out the cellar door kind of thing, wines like Blue Newt White and these Labresca wines are really quite popular and make up a pretty good amount of the wine made and sold here. I don't know what the percentages were like these days. 10, 15 years ago was probably 60, 70%.
Yeah.
But I think it's a lot less now. I think things have evolved over the past decade.
Yeah, Blue Newt is actually, I think, one of our favorite wines too, to introduce some of our interns to. We've had some international interns and some kind of spread far across the US that have never had anything made from one of these grapes before, and having them taste the wine and then having them taste the grapes and watching their facial expressions is fascinating because for them, they've never had something like this before. And they're like, oh, this is purple. This is what the purple flavor candy is actually supposed to be.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think because I think you grow up with grape flavor, and if you're coming from like a winemaking, like an old world winemaking, place, you're thinking, well, like, who invented this alien, grape, artificiality, and it's here. It's not artificial at all. It's just an American grape flavor. It's not a European grape flavor.
Raspberry.
Yeah, and it's fascinating too to me. Like, it's one of those like what's old is new again things. So it's easy to poo-poo, a Niagara or other non-vinifera wines from a region like the Finger Lakes that historically was known for them. But a lot of younger winemakers are coming back around to hybrid varietals, and a lot of forward-thinking people that are watching the climate change and the world warm are thinking more seriously about, using grapes with more disease resistance. And, that may or may not be Niagara, but, it could be something related to Niagara. And, I like that idea of, getting comfortable with something that colors outside the lines. Like this is, maybe there's like some spiritual kinship to like, really like, petrol-y Riesling or something like that. But like, it's a different animal than a vinifera wine. And, if you accept it as such, it could be fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about Niagara, and this is, you were talking about the interns for their first exposure to Niagaras, is when they first see the tube full of eyeballs, right? Yeah. You may be saying, what, a tube full of eyeballs? But
common color practice, common.
Yeah, the structure of the grape berry is a lot different with Niagara than say Riesling. Riesling they're pretty small, and the skin is really pretty much attached to the pulp. I mean, you can squish it and it kind of squeezes. But the Niagara is what they call slip skin. So when it's ripe, you can take it and you can squeeze it, and the skin comes right off. And this big little kind of gelatinous blob with the seeds in it comes spitting out. So when you run this through the crusher and then you pump it through this big 4-inch kind of clear hose into the press, you watch the grapes go through and it's like 1,000 eyeballs looking out at you as they go up into the press. It's just so fun.
Meg's always has words for the color of Niagara as we're processing it, or as it's fermenting.
The color?
What words?
I feel like I'm going to say the wrong thing now. No, always fascinating. I don't know how or why or what, but it's orange. Like the color of Niagara, when it leaves left over in the juice pan after all the juice is drained out and there's just a little bit of sediment there is orange. After we've filtered a tank, the filter pads are orange, the leaves are orange, and I don't understand how this like happens because it's a clear wine. But yeah,
it's a white wine. The grapes are green. The seeds are what, brownish?
Yeah, no different than any
vibrant orange. And also, full disclosure, there's one harvest we got in a couple tons of hand-picked Niagara. Usually it's all machine picked for us, by the way. And like those clusters are just the most vibrant, intense green you've ever seen, and they are delicious. Full disclosure, I think you guys are probably missing out on a couple bottles of Blue Newt White from the amount of Niagara grapes I eat when they first come in, but
Megs gets her fill that way.
Hey, if it's a good Scooby snack for Megs, that's all that matters during harvest.
Yeah, well, I think we should start thinking about some food. So, Bill, usually we wrap these up with kind of talking about what we might be having for dinner tonight, because we have a whole bottle of wine here left over. So Oh, Megs, I think you're over here. What are you going to have for dinner tonight?
I'm actually still going to try and hit up the grill before the weather totally changes on us because it was gorgeous today. I'm going to do some grilled Brussels sprouts with probably some bacon and cranberry and some grilled chicken with that as well. I'm feeling grilling food with my Niagara tonight.
Oh. How about you, Rebecca?
I'm going to drink it while my husband cooks our dinner.
Excellent. What do you have on your agenda for tonight, Bill?
So my wife and I have been embracing Taco Tuesday for the sake of quarantine. It is Thursday, but usually we get a 2-mealer out of it. So it's Taco Tuesday, Taco Thursday. So yeah, Taco Tuesday cannot be contained by Tuesday. So we're doing shrimp tacos again, shrimp taco leftovers, which feels like a perfect fit for Niagara. Yeah.
I would say so. How about you, Heather?
Well, it is a bit nice. So while the puppers are outside chasing each other around and running off the last of the energy before they get cooped up for whatever monstrous, nasty weather is coming, I'm going to enjoy mine with some seltzer water and some aged New York State cheeses. I have some super extra sharp from Sunset View Creamery. I have some beautiful Chev with a lot of garlic and herb in it, and some buffalo curd. And I'm going to sit back and relax and enjoy that in the garden while the youngins run off all their excess energy.
All right. What do you have going, Kelby?
Yeah, I'm going to lean into this as almost like a liqueur for cocktails. Perhaps not a surprise given the wall of liquor behind me.
Behind you.
Making cocktail. But there's a great, there's a really old-fashioned cocktail recipe from like, I don't know, I would say like early 1900s. There's this fashion of trying to find ways to use ice cream in cocktails because ice cream was the new thing. So there's one called champagne, it translates to silk or champagne. And it's a scoop of vanilla ice cream and then like 2 tablespoons of pineapple juice, 2 tablespoons of maraschino liqueur, not the bright red stuff like Luxardo, like the real maraschino. 2 tablespoons of probably like creme de violette, and then you top it with champagne, and it makes just a wild and really delicious drink. That does actually, you get bubbles, but it's also really velvety because of the ice cream melting. So I think I'll put a little bit of blue into that to see what it's a simple template to riff off of, so long as you have champagne and ice cream to run with.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to take advantage of this still nice weather before it snows on Saturday, and light up the grill and maybe do some chicken with a kind of a goopy barbecue sauce. And I think in addition to me fueling the cook, this will be part of that barbecue sauce that's going to get slathered on the chicken. That's where I'm headed. Yeah.
Lovely.
All right. Well, it's been fun. Thank you, Bill, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to connect with you all virtually. I hope you survived the inclement weather as do the vineyards.
Yeah. Before we go, I didn't ask you before. Why don't you give our viewers a quick rundown of what you do in DC?
So I own, hopefully not past tense, a couple restaurants in the Adams Morgan enclave of Washington D.C. The first of which is called Tail Up Goat, and the second of which is a little more casual kind of wine bar called the Reveler's Hour, which in our infinite wisdom, we opened the same day the Chinese announced their first case of coronavirus. So we had a brief 3-month run before we had to shut all that down, but we are preparing to pivot and reopen both places as kind of takeout delivery / commissary, and we'll be selling a lot of wine through both establishments. So in the midst of all of this, it's been nice for me to reconnect with people, as I'm sure everybody is indulging more Zoom calls than they ever imagined themselves taking, and we've been able to launch a wine school through Tail Up Goat that's been quite successful, not unlike what you're doing here, and something I never imagined that is a bit of a silver lining for the sake of the current crisis, and I'm excited to keep doing that, and hoping to find creative ways to interact with the people that want to be drinking blue and other wines.
Great.
Yeah, and I would add in the Tail Up Goat, notable one because Bill's wine list is inevitably, or is always, my favorite wine list that I've ever seen. Just the headings and the way of organizing it is really clever and really descriptive and really interesting wines. And that's not an easy feat. It's not as simple as just slapping the wines on a page, as Bill definitely knows. And also probably, and Rebecca's been there. I mean, I think to me, it's probably my favorite restaurant in the US right now in terms of the food.
Favorite.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, food, I mean, I'm a sucker for fennel and chili, and like, you definitely lean towards those. So like,
Yeah, you come to the right place.
you're playing, playing in my wheelhouse, but the food is just absolutely spectacular. So it's a pleasure to have you joining us.
No,
Great.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah.
And if you guys
And,
want to another expression of Niagara, make sure you join us at a later date for more of our virtual tasting series, because we do have a different way that we make this wine.
Oh,
So nice.
that's a great teaser. Someone's playing for keeps today.
One that involves fortification spirits and a decade or more in a barrel, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Dave, don't forget, before we leave today, we want everybody to know the beginning tomorrow, Friday, May 8th, we will be open Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays from 12 noon till 4 p.m. for pickups. So you can order ahead online at rednewt.com or call in your order. Everybody at the winery or whoever is working that day will have it ready for you, and we'll bring it out to your car. Just call when you get to the parking lot.
Completely contactless.
That's right.
Yeah, but we will smile.
Throw a mask.
We'll be able to tell, but we'll be smiling.
Everybody,
Rising, yes.
subscribe to our stream, and I'll get links to Bill's endeavors down in the notes here too, so you can find out what he's doing in DC. Okay, so cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Everyone.